The desert wind whispered across the Afghan mountains at 0547 hours, carrying with it the scent of dust and danger. 3,000 meters away, through the scope of a Barrett M82, a target moved with deadly purpose toward an American convoy. In that moment, between heartbeats, between breaths, between life and death, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos would make military history. But Commander Jake Morrison, watching from his observation post, had no idea he was about to witness the longest confirmed sniper kill by a female soldier in modern warfare. He had dismissed her when she first arrived at Forward Operating Base Thunder. Another desk warrior playing soldier, he thought. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle in her hands looked almost comically large against her 5 feet 4 inches frame. He was about to learn that appearances could be deadly wrong. What happened next in those frozen seconds would not only save 18 American lives, but would force the most decorated SEAL commander in Afghanistan to question everything he thought he knew about warfare, precision, and the warrior spirit. Because Maria Santos didn't just pull a trigger that day, she rewrote the rules of engagement and proved that heroism comes in forms the military never expected. This is the true story of how one shot changed 2 lives forever, and why the echo of that bullet is still reverberating through the halls of the Pentagon today. The Black Hawk helicopter descended through the morning haze like a mechanical vulture, its rotors churning the Afghan dust into angry spirals that stung the eyes and coated everything in a fine layer of grit. Maria Santos pressed her face against the small window, watching Forward Operating Base Thunder emerge from the landscape like a fortress carved from the earth itself. Concrete barriers, razor wire, and watchtowers created geometric scars across the ancient mountainous terrain that had witnessed countless battles throughout history. She clutched her equipment bag tighter as the helicopter touched down with a bone-jarring thud. Inside that bag was her most prized possession, a custom-modified Barrett M82.50 caliber rifle that had been her companion through 2 previous deployments. The weapon had been fine-tuned to her specifications, its scope calibrated to account for everything from wind resistance to the Coriolis effect. Most soldiers treated their rifles as tools. Maria treated hers as an extension of her soul. The crew chief's voice crackled through her headphones. "Welcome to Thunder, Sergeant. Try not to get dead on your first day." His laugh held no humor, only the dark resignation of someone who had seen too many fresh faces disappear into body bags. Maria stepped off the helicopter into the overwhelming heat of the Afghan morning. The temperature was already climbing toward 110 degrees, and the sun seemed to press down on the base like a physical weight. She shouldered her gear and looked around at her new home for the next 8 months. Thunder was smaller than her previous bases, more isolated, more dangerous. The mountains that surrounded them provided excellent cover for enemy fighters, and everyone knew that Taliban snipers had been picking off American soldiers with increasing frequency. Commander Jake Morrison watched the new arrival from his command post, a reinforced concrete structure that offered a commanding view of the entire base. Through his binoculars, he observed the slight figure walking across the landing zone with confident, measured steps. When he had been informed that a new sniper was being attached to his unit, he had expected another battle-hardened veteran like the ones he had served with during his 15 years as a Navy SEAL. Instead, he was looking at a young woman who appeared to be barely out of training. Morrison lowered his binoculars with a grimace. At 42, he had commanded some of the most elite fighting forces in the world. He had led missions in Iraq, Somalia, and Afghanistan that remained classified to this day. His chest bore the ribbons of 2 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and decorations that most soldiers only dreamed of earning. He had seen combat in every conceivable form, from urban warfare in Fallujah to mountain fighting in the Hindu Kush. In his experience, war was a brutal business that required brutal men to win it. The idea of a female sniper operating in his area of responsibility made him uncomfortable for reasons he could not entirely articulate. It was not that he doubted the capabilities of women in combat. He had served alongside female pilots, medics, and intelligence officers who had proven themselves under fire. But sniping was different. It required a particular kind of psychological makeup, a willingness to stare into a scope, and a human life from a distance where you could see your target's face clearly. It demanded patience, discipline, and an almost supernatural ability to control your breathing, heartbeat, and emotions while someone was trying to kill you. Morrison had heard stories about female snipers, particularly the legendary Soviet women who had terrorized German forces during World War II. But this was Afghanistan in 2011, not Stalingrad in 1943. The Taliban fighters they faced were experienced, well-armed, and utterly ruthless. They had been fighting in these mountains for decades, first against the Soviets, then against the Northern Alliance, and now against American forces. They knew every ridge, every valley, every potential sniper hide. Making a mistake here did not just mean failing a mission. It meant coming home in a flag-draped coffin. Maria reported to the base commander, Colonel Richard Hayes, a career infantry officer who had served 3 previous tours in Afghanistan. His office was spartanly furnished with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a large map of the region marked with red pins indicating recent enemy activity. The map told a sobering story. The pins were clustered heavily around Thunder's perimeter, indicating that the base was effectively surrounded by hostile forces. Colonel Hayes looked up from a stack of reports as Maria entered. He was a lean man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. Staff Sergeant Santos, welcome to Thunder. I've reviewed your file. 2 previous deployments, 47 confirmed kills, expert marksmanship scores across all weapon systems. Impressive record. Maria stood at attention. Thank you, sir. I'm ready to get to work. Hayes gestilt verheerzugsieht. Before you do, I want to make something clear. This is not like your previous deployments. We're operating in some of the most hostile territory in Afghanistan. Enemy snipers have killed 3 of our people in the last month, and we've been unable to locate them. The terrain here favors the defender, and these Taliban fighters have been using it to their advantage for years. They know we're here, they know our routines, and they're actively hunting our personnel. He pointed to several locations on the map. These are the areas where our people have been hit. Range estimates put the enemy snipers somewhere between 2 and 3,000 meters out, using old Soviet-era equipment that's surprisingly effective. We need someone who can reach out and touch them before they get another one of our people. Maria studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes and sight lines. What kind of support will I have, sir? You'll be working with a spotter team, but ultimately you'll be operating semi-independently. Commander Morrison will provide tactical oversight, but he'll be coordinating multiple operations simultaneously. You'll have access to our best intelligence, but in the end, it's going to come down to your ability to find these bastards and put them down. Hayes leaned back in his chair. I'm not going to lie to you, Sergeant. Some of the men here are skeptical about having a female sniper in their unit. They've never seen a woman operate in this kind of environment, and, frankly, neither have I. But your record speaks for itself, and we need every advantage we can get. Prove them wrong. After the briefing, Maria was assigned quarters in a small prefabricated building that she would share with 2 female communications specialists. The space was cramped but functional, with 3 narrow bunks, wall lockers, and a small area for personal items. She unpacked methodically, arranging her gear with the precision of someone who had learned that organization could mean the difference between life and death. Her roommates, specialists Jennifer Kim and Sarah Martinez, welcomed her warmly. Kim was a signals intelligence analyst from California who had been at Thunder for 6 months. Martinez was a radio operator from Texas who had arrived just 2 weeks earlier. Both were experienced soldiers who had adapted well to the harsh conditions of their deployment. Fair warning, Kim said as she helped Maria arrange her equipment. Some of the guys here are still living in the Stone Age when it comes to women in combat roles. Don't let them get under your skin. You'll have plenty of opportunities to prove yourself. Martinez nodded in agreement. Commander Morrison is fair, but he's old school. He's going to want to see what you can do before he trusts you with anything important. The good news is that if you prove yourself to him, he'll back you 100%. That evening, Maria took her first tour of the base perimeter. Thunder was roughly rectangular, about 800 meters long and 600 meters wide, surrounded by HESCO barriers filled with sand and topped with razor wire. Guard towers anchored each corner, manned around the clock by soldiers with heavy machine guns and night vision equipment. The base's elevated position provided good defensive advantages, but also made it visible from the surrounding mountains where enemy forces were known to operate. Maria climbed to the highest observation post, a reinforced tower that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding terrain. Through her binoculars, she studied the landscape with the trained eye of a professional sniper. The mountains rose in successive ridges, each one offering potential hiding spots for enemy marksmen. The distances were substantial, much greater than anything she had encountered in her previous deployments in Iraq. She made mental notes of wind patterns, elevation changes, and potential shooting positions. The Barrett M82 was capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, but hitting something at that distance required perfect conditions and flawless technique. She would need to spend considerable time familiarizing herself with the local environmental factors before she could be effective. Commander Morrison joined her in the observation post just as the sun was setting behind the western mountains. He had changed out of his combat uniform into casual fatigues, but his bearing remained unmistakably military. Up close, Maria could see the small scars on his hands and face that marked him as someone who had seen serious combat. Getting oriented, he asked, settling beside her with his own set of binoculars. Yes, sir. It's different from Iraq. The ranges here are much greater, and the elevation changes create some interesting ballistic challenges. Morrison studied her profile as she continued scanning the horizon. Her concentration was intense, focused, professional. Despite his initial reservations, he found himself grudgingly impressed by her obvious competence. Tell me about your previous deployments, he said. Maria lowered her binoculars. First deployment was Ramadi in 2008. Urban environment, mostly counter-sniper work. Second deployment was Kandahar in 2009. Mixed urban and rural operations. Different challenges than what I'm seeing here. 47 confirmed kills is impressive for someone your age. What's your longest shot? 1,847 meters. Kandahar Province, 2009. Taliban commander who was coordinating attacks on a supply convoy. Morrison raised an eyebrow. That's solid shooting. But out here, you might need to reach even further. The terrain allows enemy snipers to engage us from ranges we've never dealt with before. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, both studying the darkening landscape. In the distance, the lights of small villages twinkled like stars, reminders that despite the military presence, this was still home to thousands of Afghan civilians trying to live normal lives in the midst of a war. I'll be honest with you, Sergeant, Morrison said finally. I've never worked with a female sniper before. I don't know what to expect. But Colonel Hayes seems to think you're exactly what we need, and he's not usually wrong about these things. Maria met his gaze directly. I understand your concerns, sir. All I can do is show you what I'm capable of. Give me a chance, and I won't let you down. Morrison nodded slowly. Fair enough. We'll start you off with some familiarization exercises. Get you comfortable with the local conditions. After that, we'll see what develops. As they prepared to leave the observation post, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed across the base, followed immediately by the whine of a bullet passing overhead. Both soldiers dropped instinctively, and Morrison grabbed his radio. All stations, this is Thunder 6. Sniper contact, north perimeter. Sound off. The radio crackled with responses from around the base. No one had been hit, but the message was clear. Enemy snipers were active and watching Thunder constantly. Somewhere in those dark mountains, a Taliban marksman had just announced his presence and his intent. Maria felt a familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with professional excitement. She had found her purpose again. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute when Maria's alarm buzzed at 0400 hours. She had requested the early start time because she wanted to familiarize herself with her weapon and the local conditions before the base came fully alive. The Barrett M82 required careful preparation and testing, especially in a new environment where factors like altitude, humidity, and temperature could significantly affect ballistic performance. She dressed quietly in the darkness, careful not to wake her roommates, and made her way to the armory. The night air was surprisingly cool, a sharp contrast to the blazing heat that would arrive with the sunrise. Stars blazed overhead with an intensity rarely seen in populated areas, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of generators and the occasional radio check from the guard towers. Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez, the base's senior sniper instructor, was already waiting for her at the armory. A veteran of 4 combat deployments, Rodriguez had worked with some of the best marksmen in the military and had a reputation for being able to spot talent quickly. His weathered face and steady hand spoke of countless hours behind scope, and his students either learned from him or washed out of sniper programs entirely. "Morning, Santos. Ready to see what you've got?" His voice carried the gravelly tone of someone who had spent years shouting orders over the sound of gunfire. "Yes, Master Sergeant. I've been looking forward to this." Rodriguez led her to a reinforced bunker that served as the base's primary sniper position. The structure was built into a natural ridge line and offered excellent concealment while providing clear fields of fire across the valley below. Sandbags and camouflage netting disguised its outline, and small firing ports allowed shooters to engage targets without exposing themselves to counter-sniper fire. Inside the bunker, Maria unpacked her Barrett with the reverence of someone handling a precious artifact. The rifle was a work of art, its massive .50 caliber barrel and sophisticated recoil system capable of delivering devastating firepower at extreme ranges. She had customized every component, from the trigger pull weight to the scope mounting system, creating a weapon that was perfectly matched to her shooting style and physical characteristics. Rodriguez watched approvingly as she performed her pre-firing inspection. "Good. I can see you know your weapon. Tell me about your modifications." Maria pointed to various components as she explained. Custom trigger job, 2.5-pound pull, upgraded scope rings, and bases for better stability. Free-floating barrel for improved accuracy. Modified stock for better ergonomics. The scope is a Schmidt and Bender 5-25x56 with custom turrets calibrated for this specific rifle and ammunition combination. What's your zero distance? 100 meters for initial zero, then confirmed at 300 and 600. I prefer to dial for longer distances rather than using holdover points. Rodriguez nodded. Most precision shooters prefer the dialing method because it was more accurate, though it required more time between shots. "Show me your shooting position." Maria settled behind the rifle with practiced ease, her body forming the stable foundation that precision shooting demanded. Her left hand supported the fore-end, while her right hand gripped the pistol grip with exactly the pressure needed to control the trigger without disturbing the rifle's aim. Her cheek weld against the stock was consistent, ensuring that her eye alignment with the scope would be identical for every shot. Good position. Natural point of aim looks solid. Let's start with some known distance targets and see how you do. The first target was a standard silhouette at 400 meters, an easy shot for any competent marksman. Maria's first round struck dead center, the heavy .50 caliber bullet creating a dramatic impact signature that was visible even without magnification. Rodriguez made notes on a shooting card as she continued engaging targets at progressively longer distances. At 600 meters, her groups remained tight and centered. At 800 meters, she was still hitting within the vital zone of the target. Rodriguez increased the difficulty by having her engage targets in different wind conditions, testing her ability to read environmental factors and make appropriate adjustments. Winds gusting from the southwest at about 12 miles per hour, Rodriguez called out as Maria prepared to engage a target at 1,000 meters. Show me how you compensate. Maria has studied the terrain between her position and the target, noting how the wind affected vegetation and dust at various points along the bullet's path. Wind was one of the most challenging factors in long-range shooting because it varied constantly and could affect the bullet differently at various points during its flight. She made a careful adjustment to her scope and fired. The bullet struck slightly left of center, still within the scoring rings, but not the perfect center hit she preferred. Good shot, but you undercompensated slightly, Rodriguez observed. The wind down in that valley is probably running about 15% stronger than what we're feeling up here. Terrain funnels create some tricky conditions. Maria absorbed the feedback and made a mental note about local wind patterns. Every shooting environment had its unique characteristics, and learning them quickly was essential for operational success. As the morning progressed, Rodriguez pushed her to longer and longer distances. At 1,200 meters, she was still hitting consistently. At 1,500 meters, her accuracy remained impressive. When they reached 1,800 meters, she was pushing the practical limits of the Barrett system, but her shots continued to find their marks. Outstanding shooting, Santos. Your fundamentals are rock solid, and you're adapting to the local conditions faster than most shooters I've worked with. Rodriguez's praise was not given lightly. Let's take a break, and then I'll show you some of the specific challenges we're dealing with out here. During their break, Rodriguez briefed her on the tactical situation. The enemy snipers we're facing are good. Better than good, actually. They're using old Dragunov rifles mostly, but they know this terrain like we know our hometown streets. They've been picking off our people from ranges where we can't effectively return fire with standard weapons. He pointed to a topographical map of the area. Their favorite positions are up in these ridges, anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 meters out. They take one shot and then disappear. By the time we can get air support or artillery on target, they're long gone. We need someone who can reach out and touch them at those distances. Maria studied the map carefully. What about counter-battery fire? Mortars, artillery. We've tried that, but the terrain gives them too many places to hide, and the political situation limits how much indirect fire we can use. Too many civilian villages in the area. We need surgical precision, not area bombardment. The afternoon training session focused on extreme range shooting. Rodriguez had Maria engage targets at distances that pushed both her skills and her equipment to their limits. The 2,000-meter target was barely visible even through her high-powered scope, and the bullet flight time was long enough that she had to account for Earth rotation in addition to wind, temperature, and elevation effects. Her first shot at 2,000 meters missed low and to the right. She made careful adjustments and fired again. This shot was closer, but still not on target. The third shot found its mark, and Rodriguez let out a low whistle. Damn fine shooting. Not many people can hit at that distance, especially on a new range with unfamiliar conditions. Commander Morrison appeared at the bunker entrance just as Maria was preparing to engage a target at 2,200 meters. He had been monitoring her progress throughout the day through radio reports from Rodriguez, and what he heard had impressed him despite his initial skepticism. "How's she doing, Master Sergeant?" "Sir, she's one of the best natural shooters I've ever worked with. Her fundamentals are textbook perfect, and she's got an intuitive understanding of ballistics that you just can't teach. Give her a few more days to learn the local conditions, and she'll be able to reach out as far as anyone we've got." Morrison watched through binoculars as Maria engaged the 2,200-meter target. The shot was perfect, striking dead center of the silhouette. He found himself reconsidering his earlier reservations about female snipers. What's her maximum effective range with that Barrett? Under perfect conditions, she could probably hit a man-sized target at 2,500 meters, maybe a bit more. But out here, with the wind and elevation changes, I'd say 2,200 to 2,300 meters is more realistic for consistent hits. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. The enemy snipers they were facing typically engaged from ranges between 2,000 and 2,800 meters, putting them just at the edge of what even the best American marksmen could reach. If Santos could consistently hit at 2,300 meters or more, she might be able to turn the tables on their tormentors. That evening, Maria joined the regular briefing in the base's operations center. The room was packed with soldiers from various units, all receiving updates on the tactical situation and intelligence reports about enemy activity. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the room next to a large screen display showing aerial photographs of the surrounding terrain. Intelligence indicates increased enemy sniper activity in the northern approaches, Hayes announced. We've had 2 near misses in the past week, and drone surveillance has identified several potential hide sites in the ridge lines overlooking our supply routes. He clicked to the next slide, showing detailed photographs of suspected sniper positions. These locations offer excellent fields of fire and concealment, but they're also at extreme range from any of our current positions. We need to develop a strategy for neutralizing these threats before they get one of our people. Morrison stood up from his seat in the front row. Sir, I'd like to recommend that we deploy Sergeant Santos in a counter-sniper role. Her performance during training today suggests she has the capability to engage targets at the ranges we're dealing with. A murmur ran through the room. Many of the soldiers present had heard about the new female sniper, but few had expected her to be deployed operationally so soon after her arrival. Hayes looked at Maria, who was sitting in the back of the room. Sergeant Santos, do you feel ready for operational deployment? Maria stood and addressed the room with quiet confidence. Yes, sir. I understand the tactical situation and the challenges involved. I'm confident that I can contribute effectively to the mission. One of the platoon leaders, a grizzled staff sergeant named Williams, raised his hand. Sir, with all due respect, shouldn't we wait until she's had more time to acclimate? These aren't training targets she'll be shooting at. Morrison answered before Hayes could respond. Staff Sergeant Williams, I understand your concerns, but Sergeant Santos has already demonstrated capabilities that exceed those of our current sniper assets. Master Sergeant Rodriguez has confirmed that she can engage targets at the ranges we're dealing with, and we need every advantage we can get. Hayes nodded in agreement. The decision is made. Sergeant Santos will be deployed in a counter-sniper role starting tomorrow. She'll work with the spotter team and have priority for intelligence support. Any questions? The room remained silent, though Maria could sense the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in the faces around her. She understood their concerns. In their shoes, she would probably feel the same way about an untested newcomer being given such a critical mission. After the briefing, several soldiers approached her to introduce themselves and offer words of encouragement. She was particularly pleased to meet Corporal Mike Chun, who would be serving as her spotter. Chun was a former infantry soldier who had cross-trained as a sniper spotter and had been waiting for assignment to a sniper team. I've been studying the terrain and enemy patterns for 3 months, Chun told her as they reviewed maps and intelligence reports. I think I've identified some patterns in their behavior that we might be able to exploit. Chun spread out a large-scale map and pointed to several marked locations. They seem to prefer these ridge lines because they offer multiple escape routes and good concealment. But they also have limited fields of fire from some of these positions, which means they have to move to get clear shots at different parts of our base. Maria studied the terrain features carefully. How long does it typically take them to move between positions? Based on the timing of previous attacks, I'd estimate 15 to 20 minutes minimum. The terrain is rough, and they have to move carefully to avoid detection. An idea began forming in Maria's mind. What if we could predict which position they'll use next and get there first? Chin's eyes lit up with understanding. Set up an ambush. Use their own patterns against them. They spent the next 2 hours developing a preliminary plan for their first mission. It was ambitious and risky, but it offered the possibility of finally turning the tables on the enemy snipers who had been terrorizing Thunder for months. As Maria prepared for sleep that night, she felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and nervousness that preceded combat operations. Tomorrow would be her first real test in Afghanistan, and she knew that both her reputation and the lives of her fellow soldiers would depend on her performance. Outside her window, she could hear the distant sound of artillery fire from another base, a reminder that the war continued around the clock. Somewhere in those dark mountains, enemy snipers were probably planning their next attack. But they had no idea that their reign of terror was about to encounter an unexpected challenge from a young woman with a Barrett rifle and the skills to use it effectively. The mission launched at 0230 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for movement, but made navigation treacherous across the rocky terrain surrounding Thunder Base. Maria and Corporal Chun moved like shadows through the darkness, their equipment carefully secured to prevent any metallic sounds that might betray their position to enemy listeners. Each step was deliberate, calculated, part of a 3-hour infiltration that would position them in a concealed observation post overlooking the valley where enemy snipers had been operating. Maria carried her Barrett M82 in a custom tactical sling that distributed the weapon's 30-pound weight across her shoulders and torso. The rifle was wrapped in camouflaged fabric to break up its distinctive outline, and every piece of metal had been treated with non-reflective coating to prevent accidental light signatures. Her ammunition loadout consisted of 20 rounds of match-grade .50 caliber bullets, each one hand-selected for consistent weight and optimal ballistic performance. Chun carried the team's observation equipment, including a high-powered spotting scope, laser rangefinder, weather monitoring devices, and communication gear. His role was crucial to their success. While Maria focused on the mechanical aspects of shooting, Chun would read wind conditions, calculate range adjustments, and maintain situational awareness of the broader tactical picture. Their destination was a rocky outcropping designated observation post Sierra, located 2,800 meters northeast of Thunder Base. Intelligence analysts had identified this position as offering optimal fields of fire across the valley where enemy snipers had been most active. More importantly, it was within range of several suspected enemy hide sites that had been identified through drone surveillance and pattern analysis. The climb to OP Sierra was brutal. The terrain consisted of loose shale, hidden crevices, and thorny vegetation that seemed designed to catch on equipment and clothing. Both soldiers were carrying heavy loads, and the thin mountain air made every step an effort. Maria's legs burned with the exertion, but she maintained the steady pace that Chun set, knowing that arriving at their position exhausted would compromise their effectiveness. They reached OP Sierra just as the eastern horizon began to show the first faint glow of approaching dawn. The position was everything the intelligence reports had promised, a natural rock formation that provided excellent concealment while offering panoramic views across the valley below. Chun immediately began preparing their hide site, arranging camouflage netting and positioning equipment for optimal concealment. Maria set up her Barrett on a specially designed bipod that allowed for fine adjustments in elevation and windage. She performed a detailed inspection of the weapon system, checking scope alignment, verifying zero settings, and ensuring that all mechanical components were functioning properly. In sniper operations, equipment failure was not just inconvenient, it could be fatal. As the sun rose over the mountains, the valley below gradually emerged from darkness like a photograph developing in slow motion. Maria began her systematic survey of the terrain, using her scope to examine every ridge, depression, and potential hiding spot within a 3-kilometer radius. Each location was mentally cataloged and assigned a priority based on its tactical advantages and likelihood of enemy occupation. Chun worked alongside her with the spotting scope, cross-referencing what they observed with intelligence reports and photographic reconnaissance. "There," he whispered, pointing to a ridge approximately 2,400 meters to the northwest. "That matches the description of Position Tango from yesterday's intelligence brief." Good concealment, multiple escape routes, clear fields of fire to Thunder Base. Maria adjusted her rifle to cover the indicated area and began a detailed examination through her scope. The position looked promising for an enemy sniper. Rock formations provided natural concealment. Scatter vegetation would help break up a shooter's outline, and the elevation offered excellent visibility across the valley. "I've got good visual on the position," she whispered into her radio microphone. "No movement detected, but there's several areas where someone could be hidden." The response came from Commander Morrison, who was monitoring their mission from Thunder Base. "Copy, Sierra Team. Maintain observation. Intelligence indicates possible enemy movement in your area within the next 2 hours." The waiting began. Sniper operations were as much about patience as they were about marksmanship. Enemy shooters might remain motionless for hours before revealing themselves, and a successful counter-sniper had to be prepared to wait even longer. Maria settled into a comfortable shooting position that she could maintain for extended periods, while Chun continued scanning the broader area for signs of enemy activity. The temperature climbed steadily as the morning progressed. Even in the shade of their rocky hide, the heat became oppressive. Sweat stung Maria's eyes, but she resisted the temptation to wipe her face, knowing that any unnecessary movement might compromise their concealment. Professional snipers learned to tolerate discomfort as a necessary part of their craft. At 0847 hours, Chin spotted something that made him tense with alertness. Movement, 2 o'clock, approximately 2,600 meters. Single individual moving along the ridgeline toward position Tango. Maria shifted her aim to the indicated area and picked up the target in her scope. Through the powerful magnification, she could see a figure dressed in loose-fitting clothing typical of local fighters, carrying what appeared to be a long rifle. The individual moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood the importance of concealment. "I have visual contact," she whispered. Adult male, armed with what appears to be a rifle, moving toward the suspected sniper position. Range approximately 2,600 meters. Morrison's voice crackled through their radio. "Sierra Team, you're cleared to engage if you have a positive identification of hostile intent." The figure continued moving along the ridge, occasionally pausing to survey the valley below through what appeared to be binoculars or a rifle scope. Maria kept him centered in her crosshairs, waiting for a clear indication that he was preparing to engage American forces. Target is now in position and appears to be setting up a shooting position, Chin observed through his spotting scope. He's got a rifle, and he's orienting toward Thunder Base. Maria made minute adjustments to her scope settings, accounting for the range, elevation difference, and wind conditions. At 2,600 meters, the bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach the target, and environmental factors would significantly affect its trajectory. Temperature, air pressure, humidity, wind speed, and direction all had to be calculated and compensated for. Wind is variable, generally from the southwest at 8 to 12 miles per hour, Chin reported. Temperature is 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity approximately 30%. Range confirmed at 2,623 meters. Maria dialed the appropriate adjustments into her scope and settled into her final shooting position. The target was clearly visible through her optics, a human figure approximately 18 inches wide at the shoulders. At this distance, the margin for error was minimal. A small mistake in wind reading or range estimation would result in a complete miss. "Target appears to be taking aim at the base," Chun whispered urgently. "He's definitely hostile." The enemy sniper was indeed positioning his rifle for a shot at Thunder Base, where American soldiers were going about their morning routines, unaware that they were being stalked by a skilled marksman. Through her scope, Maria could see the target's rifle barrel glinting in the sunlight as he made his final preparations. Maria controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow and her body to relax into the shooting position. The crosshairs of her scope were centered precisely on the target's torso, the largest and most reliable aiming point at such extreme range. She began applying pressure to the trigger with the smooth, steady squeeze that separated professional marksmen from amateur shooters. The Barrett M82 fired with a thunderous roar that echoed across the valley like a cannon shot. The massive .50 caliber bullet left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, beginning its 3-second journey across the mountains toward a target who had no idea death was traveling toward him at supersonic speed. Through her scope, Maria watched the bullet's impact. The enemy sniper simply disappeared, there one moment, and gone the next, as 750 grains of precision-manufactured copper and lead delivered devastating kinetic energy to its target. There was no dramatic gesture, no Hollywood-style death scene, just the sudden absence of a threat that had been preparing to kill American soldiers. Target down, Chun confirmed through his spotting scope. Clean hit, no movement visible. Maria cycled the Barrett's bolt action, ejecting the spent cartridge case and chambering a fresh round in case a follow-up shot was needed. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, her emotions carefully managed. This was not her first kill, and she knew it would not be her last. Morrison's voice came through their radio with unmistakable satisfaction. Outstanding work, Sierra team. You just save American lives. Maintain your position and continue observation. For the next 6 hours, Maria and Chun remained in their hide site, watching for additional enemy activity and providing intelligence reports to Thunder Base. The elimination of the enemy sniper had clearly disrupted whatever operation was being planned, because no additional hostile activity was observed in their sector. During the long afternoon, Maria reflected on the significance of what had just occurred. The 2,623-meter shot was the longest confirmed kill of her career, achieved under combat conditions against a target who was actively threatening American forces. More importantly, it demonstrated that the Barrett M82 system was capable of reaching enemy snipers at the extreme ranges they had been using to terrorize Thunder Base. Chun broke the silence around 1,500 hours. You know the shot is going to make waves back at headquarters, right? Most guys would consider that a career-defining moment. Maria kept her eyes on her scope as she responded. It's just one shot, Chun. There are more targets out there, and they're going to be more careful now that they know we can reach them. She was right, of course. Enemy snipers were adaptive and would modify their tactics in response to this new threat. They might move to longer ranges, change their patterns, or employ different concealment techniques. The tactical game of move and countermove would continue, but the balance of power had shifted slightly in favor of the American forces. As evening approached, Maria and Chun began preparing to return to Thunder Base. Their mission had been a complete success. They had eliminated a confirmed threat and demonstrated the capability to engage enemy forces at previously unreachable distances. The intelligence gathered during their 12-hour observation period would also prove valuable for planning future operations. The journey back to base was accomplished under cover of darkness, with the same careful attention to noise and light discipline that had characterized their infiltration. Maria felt the satisfying weight of the Barrett across her shoulders and the quiet confidence that came from a job well done. Upon their return to Thunder Base, they were met by Commander Morrison and Colonel Hayes, both eager to debrief the mission and understand exactly what had been accomplished. The successful engagement represented a significant tactical victory, but more importantly, it proved that American forces now had the capability to reach enemy snipers who had previously operated with impunity. Excellent work, both of you, Colonel Hayes said as they completed their mission debrief. This changes the tactical equation significantly. Word of this engagement will spread quickly among enemy forces, and they'll have to reconsider their current tactics. Morrison nodded in agreement. Sergeant Santos, that was exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. You've proven that the Barrett system can be effectively employed at these extreme ranges, and you've given us a new tool for dealing with the sniper threat. As Maria cleaned and maintained her rifle in preparation for the next mission, she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her skills were making a real difference in the war. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. Enemy snipers would adapt to this new threat, and she would need to stay ahead of them through superior training, better equipment, and tactical innovation. The hunt had begun in earnest, and Maria Santos was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 3 weeks had passed since Maria's first successful engagement, and the tactical situation around Thunder Base had evolved dramatically. Word of the long-range kill had spread through both American and Taliban networks, forcing enemy snipers to reconsider their previously safe operating distances. Some had withdrawn to even more extreme ranges, while others had changed their tactics entirely, preferring ambush attacks to the methodical stalking that had characterized their previous operations. Commander Morrison stood in the base's intelligence center at 0600 hours, studying a collection of photographs and reports that painted a troubling picture. A new enemy sniper had appeared in the region, someone with capabilities that far exceeded those of the local Taliban fighters they had been dealing with. Intelligence analysts believed he was a foreign fighter, possibly Chechen or Arab, with formal military training and access to advanced equipment. Maria had joined Morrison at the intelligence table, already dressed in full combat gear for what promised to be their most challenging mission yet. Over the past 3 weeks, she had conducted 6 successful sniper missions, eliminating 8 enemy fighters and disrupting numerous planned attacks. Her reputation had spread throughout the American forces in the region, earning her both respect from her fellow soldiers and the grudging admiration of commanders who had initially questioned her capabilities. "Take a look at this," Morrison said, pointing to a series of aerial photographs taken over the past week. "We've got a new player in the game, and he's good. Very good." The photographs showed the aftermath of 3 separate attacks on American convoys, each one bearing the signature of a highly skilled marksman. The wounds were consistent with large-caliber rifle fire, and the angles of attack suggested shots taken from extreme range with exceptional accuracy. More disturbing was the precision with which the sniper had selected his targets. In each case, he had eliminated the convoy's senior leader with a single shot. "Estimated range?" Maria asked, studying the terrain features in the photographs. "Between 3,000 and 3,500 meters, based on ballistic analysis of the recovered bullets and the geography of the attack sites. He's operating at distances where most marksmen can't even see their targets clearly, let alone hit them." Maria felt a chill of professional recognition. She was looking at the work of someone who shared her level of skill and dedication, but who was using those abilities to kill American soldiers. This was not a typical Taliban fighter with an old rifle and basic training. This was a master craftsman practicing his deadly art. "What do we know about his equipment?" Morrison handed her a detailed intelligence report. Based on bullet fragments recovered from the attack sites, he's using a .50 caliber rifle, probably Russian-made. Could be an OSV 96 or something similar. High-quality optics, definitely not the typical equipment we've been seeing from local fighters. The report included a psychological profile developed by military intelligence analysts. The enemy sniper demonstrated patience, discipline, and tactical sophistication that suggested extensive training and combat experience. His selection of targets showed an understanding of military organization and leadership structures that went far beyond the typical knowledge of guerrilla fighters. "There's more," Morrison continued. "Intelligence intercepts suggest he's specifically hunting for the American sniper who's been disrupting Taliban operations. He knows you're out here, Sergeant, and he's looking for you." Maria absorbed this information with the calm professionalism that had become her trademark. The idea that she was being hunted by a skilled adversary added a personal dimension to the conflict, but it also presented an opportunity. If the enemy sniper was actively seeking her out, she might be able to use that obsession against him. "What's our intelligence on his current location?" "That's why you're here. We've identified a pattern in his attacks, and think we know where he'll strike next." Morrison moved to a large-scale map mounted on the wall. "There's a supply convoy moving through this valley tomorrow morning. Based on his previous targets and the tactical advantages of the terrain, We believe he'll position himself somewhere in this ridge complex. The indicated area was a series of interconnected ridge lines, approximately 3,200 meters from the convoy route. It offered excellent concealment, multiple escape routes, and clear fields of fire across the entire valley. From a sniper's perspective, it was nearly perfect, which also made it predictable. "We want you to get there first," Morrison explained. "Set up in a position where you can observe his most likely hide sites. When he shows himself to take his shot, you take yours." Maria studied the map carefully, calculating ranges and considering the ballistic challenges involved. At 3,200 meters, she would be pushing the Barrett M82 to its absolute limits. Environmental factors would have maximum effect on the bullet's trajectory, and the margin for error would be virtually non-existent. What about backup? Air support. You'll have a full support package standing by, but they'll be positioned well back to avoid spooking the target. This has to look like a routine convoy movement, or he'll smell the trap. It's going to be just you and Chen out there until the shot is taken. The mission briefing continued for another hour, covering every aspect of the operation from infiltration routes to extraction procedures. Intelligence analysts provided detailed information about wind patterns, temperature variations, and other environmental factors that would affect long-range shooting in the target area. Weather forecasters predicted optimal conditions, clear skies, light winds, and stable atmospheric pressure. Maria spent the remainder of the day preparing her equipment and reviewing the ballistic calculations required for extreme-range shooting. At 3,200 meters, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 seconds, during which time the target could move, the wind could shift, or any number of variables could affect the shot's outcome. She would have one chance to eliminate a dangerous adversary, and failure would likely result in the deaths of American soldiers. The infiltration began at 2,200 hours, with Maria and Chen moving through the darkness toward Observation Post Gulf, a rocky outcropping that offered visual coverage of the suspected enemy sniper positions. The journey required 7 hours of careful movement across some of the most treacherous terrain in the region, but it would position them perfectly for the next morning's engagement. They reached their destination just as the eastern sky began to lighten, providing barely enough time to establish their hide site before full daylight would make movement impossible. The position was everything they had hoped for: excellent concealment, panoramic views of the target area, and a stable shooting platform for the Barrett. Maria set up her rifle with meticulous care, adjusting the bipod legs to achieve perfect stability and aligning the scope for optimal clarity. At 3,200 meters, the target would appear as little more than a small, even through her powerful optics, requiring absolute precision in every aspect of the shooting process. Chun positioned himself with the spotting scope and began systematically surveying the suspected enemy positions. The area was vast, covering several square kilometers of rocky terrain where a skilled sniper could remain hidden until the moment he chose to reveal himself. The convoy departed Thunder Base at 0800 hours, following the predetermined route through the valley below. From their elevated position, Maria and Chun could see the vehicles moving along the dusty road like toys in a sandbox, unaware that they were being watched by both friendly and hostile forces. "Movement," Chun whispered at 0834 hours. "Ridge line, approximately 3,200 meters, just left to the prominent rock formation." Maria swung her rifle toward the indicated area and began scanning through her scope. For several minutes, she saw nothing but rocks and shadows. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in the pattern of light and shadow near the base of a large boulder. "I've got something," she whispered. "Possible human shape, very well concealed, approximately 3,200 meters northwest." Through her scope, Maria could barely make out what appeared to be a human figure positioned behind a sophisticated camouflage screen. The target was nearly invisible, blending perfectly with the surrounding terrain in a display of fieldcraft that spoke to years of experience and training. "Target appears to be setting up a shooting position," Chen observed. "He's got a rifle, and he's orienting toward the convoy." Maria began her final preparations for what would be the most challenging shot of her career. The range was extreme, the target was barely visible, and the consequences of missing were unacceptable. She dialed the maximum elevation adjustment into her scope and added additional compensation for the long-range effects that would influence the bullet's trajectory. Wind is light and variable, generally from the northwest at 4 to 6 miles per hour, Chen reported. Temperature 72 degrees, humidity 45%, atmospheric pressure 29.87 inches. Range confirmed at 3,247 meters. 3,247 meters. Maria had never attempted a shot at such extreme range under combat conditions. The distance was so great that the curvature of the Earth would actually affect the bullet's path, requiring compensation calculations that pushed the limits of ballistic science. Through her scope, she watched the enemy sniper making his final preparations. She could see the outline of his rifle barrel extending from his hide sight, pointing toward the approaching convoy. American soldiers were about to come under fire from one of the most skilled marksmen in the Taliban arsenal, and she was the only person in position to prevent it. Maria controlled her breathing and settled into the perfect shooting position. Every muscle in her body relaxed, except for the finger that would release 750 grains of precisely manufactured death across more than 3 kilometers of Afghan mountainside. The crosshairs of her scope were centered on the barely visible target, wavering slightly in the heat shimmer that rose from the sun-baked rocks. The Barrett M82 fired with its characteristic thunderous roar, the massive muzzle blast kicking up a cloud of dust and debris that temporarily obscured her view of the target area. The bullet began its journey across the valley, climbing to an apex of nearly 300 feet above the surrounding terrain before beginning its descent toward a target who had no idea that death was approaching at 2,800 feet per second. For seconds elapsed, an eternity in combat time. Through her scope, Maria watched for any sign of impact or target reaction. At such extreme range, even a perfect hit might not be immediately visible. Impact, Chun called out through his spotting scope. Target down. No movement visible. Maria cycled the Barrett's bolt action and kept the rifle trained on the target area, ready to fire a follow-up shot if necessary. But through her scope, she could see that no second shot would be required. The enemy sniper had simply vanished from his position, eliminated by a shot that had traveled more than 2 miles through the thin mountain air to find its mark with surgical precision. Holy shit, Chun whispered, his professional composure momentarily forgotten. That's the longest confirmed kill I've ever seen. Maria, you just made history. The implications of what had just occurred began to sink in. At 3,247 meters, Maria had set a new record for the longest confirmed sniper kill by a female soldier, and possibly the longest confirmed kill by any American sniper in Afghanistan. More importantly, she had eliminated a dangerous adversary who had been responsible for multiple American casualties. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through their radio with barely contained excitement. Sierra Team, confirm target status. Target down, Maria responded calmly. 1 shot, 1 kill at 3,247 meters. Threat eliminated. There was a long pause before Morrison responded. Outstanding work, Sierra Team. You just made the history books. As the convoy continued safely through the valley below, Maria felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her skills had once again saved American lives. But she also understood that this shot would have consequences far beyond the immediate tactical situation. News of a 3,247-meter kill would spread throughout the military community and beyond, establishing her reputation as one of the premier marksmen of her generation. The extraction from Opie Gulf was conducted without incident, and Maria and Chen returned to Thunder Base to find that word of their achievement had already begun to spread. Fellow soldiers looked at her with new respect and not a little awe, while senior officers began discussing the broader implications of what had been accomplished. As Maria cleaned and maintained her Barrett that evening, she reflected on the shot that would define her military career. The 3,247-meter engagement represented the perfect convergence of skill, equipment, conditions, and opportunity, a moment when everything had come together to create something extraordinary. But even as she savored the satisfaction of a job well done, Maria knew that the war would continue, and new challenges would emerge. Enemy snipers would study this engagement and adapt their tactics accordingly. Technology would evolve, ranges would increase, and the deadly game of hunter and hunted would continue across the mountains of Afghanistan. For now, though, she was content to know that she had proven herself capable of extraordinary achievements under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The 3,347-meter shot had established her as a master of her profession and ensured that her name would be remembered long after the last shots of the Afghanistan war had been fired. The news of Maria's record-breaking shot traveled through military channels with the speed of digital communications, reaching Pentagon briefing rooms, special operations command centers, and sniper schools across the globe within hours of the engagement. At 3,347 meters, the kill represented more than just exceptional marksmanship. It was a technological and tactical breakthrough that would influence military doctrine for years to come. Commander Morrison found himself fielding calls from senior officers throughout the military hierarchy, each wanting to understand how a relatively unknown staff sergeant had achieved what many considered impossible. The shot had been verified through multiple sources including drone footage, ballistic analysis, and witness statements, leaving no doubt about its authenticity or significance. More importantly, for the immediate tactical situation, the elimination of the foreign sniper had created a psychological impact that extended far beyond the physical removal of a single threat. Taliban fighters throughout the region now understood that American forces possessed the capability to reach them at distances they had previously considered safe. The balance of power in the sniper war had shifted decisively in favor of the coalition forces. Maria Santos, however, remained focused on the operational requirements of her deployment rather than the growing media attention surrounding her achievement. 3 days after the record shot, she was back in the field with Corporal Chun, conducting reconnaissance missions and providing overwatch for convoy operations. The war continued regardless of individual accomplishments, and her skills were needed daily to protect American lives. The Taliban's response to their new vulnerability was swift and predictable. Enemy snipers began operating from even more extreme ranges, some pushing beyond 4,000 meters in an attempt to stay outside the reach of Maria's Barrett M82. Others abandoned long-range tactics entirely, shifting to improvised explosive devices and close-range ambush attacks that negated the advantages of precision marksmanship. They're adapting faster than we expected, Morrison observed during a tactical briefing held 1 week after the record shot. Intelligence reports indicate that several Taliban units have completely changed their operational patterns to avoid sniper engagement. Coronel Noded Grimli. That's both good news and bad news. Good because it means they're afraid of our sniper capabilities. Bad because it forces them into tactics that are harder to predict and counter. Maria studied the intelligence reports with professional interest. The evolution of enemy tactics was a natural response to her demonstrated capabilities, and it presented new challenges that would require innovative solutions. Traditional counter-sniper operations were becoming less relevant as enemy forces shifted away from long-range engagements. "Sir, I'd like to propose expanding our mission parameters," she said, addressing both Morrison and Hayes. "If they're moving to shorter ranges and different tactics, we need to be able to respond accordingly. The Barrett is excellent for extreme-range work, but it's not the right tool for every situation." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" "A more flexible approach. Multiple weapon systems, varied tactics, maybe some urban operations if the situation calls for it. The enemy is evolving, and we need to evolve with them." Her suggestion sparked a lengthy discussion about the future of sniper operations in Afghanistan. Traditional military doctrine emphasized specialization. Snipers operated at long range, infantry handled close combat, and urban warfare was left to specialized units. But the fluid nature of the Afghan conflict was breaking down those rigid categories, demanding more adaptable approaches. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent radio call from the base's intelligence center. A new threat had emerged, one that would test Maria's skills in ways that her previous missions had not prepared her for. "Sir, we've got a developing situation," the intelligence officer reported. "Taliban forces have taken control of the village of Kamar, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of here. They're holding civilians as human shields and have positioned snipers in defensive positions throughout the area." Hayes immediately called for a full briefing in the operations center. Within minutes, the room was filled with officers from various units, all studying aerial photographs and intelligence reports about the rapidly developing crisis in Kamar. The situation was complex and dangerous. Taliban forces had occupied the village in retaliation for cooperation with American forces, taking approximately 60 civilians hostage and fortifying key positions with experienced fighters. Drone surveillance had identified at least 3 enemy snipers positioned in buildings throughout the village, making any conventional assault extremely costly in both military and civilian casualties. "The rules of engagement are crystal clear," Hayes emphasized as he briefed the assembled officers. "Civilian casualties are unacceptable. We need surgical precision in everything we do. Any operation that risks significant civilian harm is off the table." Morrison studied the aerial photographs with the eye of someone who had planned countless similar operations. The enemy snipers are positioned to cover all the main approaches to the village. Any ground assault would face coordinated fire from multiple directions. "We need to neutralize those snipers before we can move troops forward." Maria examined the reconnaissance photos carefully, noting the distances and angles involved. The village was built around a central square, with multi-story buildings providing elevated positions for enemy marksmen. The ranges were moderate by her recent standards, between 800 and 1,200 meters from potential shooting positions outside the village perimeter. "I can reach all 3 sniper positions from the hills overlooking the village," she said after several minutes of analysis. "But the angles are challenging, and there's significant risk of civilian casualties if anything goes wrong." The challenge was unlike anything she had faced before. Her previous missions had involved clear-cut military targets in relatively open terrain. Now she was being asked to engage enemy snipers who were deliberately positioned among civilian buildings, where missed shot or miscalculation could result in innocent deaths. Hayes made the decision that would define the next phase of Maria's deployment. "Sergeant Santos, you're authorized to attempt precision engagement of the enemy snipers, but only if you have absolute certainty of target identification and minimal civilian risk. One mistake could turn this into an international incident." The mission planning took 6 hours, with Maria and Chun working alongside intelligence specialists to identify optimal shooting positions and develop detailed engagement protocols. Every aspect of the operation was scrutinized for potential civilian impact, from bullet trajectory to the timing of shots. The infiltration to their shooting position began at midnight, with Maria and Chun moving through terrain that was more populated and potentially hostile than their previous operational areas. The journey to Observation Post Hotel required them to navigate agricultural areas, irrigation ditches, and rural compound where enemy sympathizers might be watching for American forces. They reached their position at 0400 hours, establishing a hide site on a rocky hillside that offered clear lines of sight to all 3 suspected enemy sniper positions in Kamar village. Through her scope, Maria could see lights in many of the buildings, reminders that innocent families were sleeping just meters away from the enemy fighters she was tasked to eliminate. As dawn broke over the village, the tactical situation became clear through their observation equipment. The Taliban snipers had positioned themselves with considerable skill, choosing locations that provided good fields of fire while using civilian buildings for concealment and protection. Each position was a complex shooting problem that would require careful consideration of angles, backdrop, and civilian safety. Target 1 is in the minaret of the central mosque, Chen reported through his spotting scope. Good concealment, excellent field of fire, but there are residential buildings directly behind the position. Maria studied the target through her scope, calculating the ballistic path her bullet would follow after impact. The minaret offered an elevated shooting position that dominated the entire village square, but the urban environment created complications that didn't exist in her previous mountain engagements. Target 2 is positioned in a 3-story building on the north side of the square, Chun continued. Appears to be using a second-floor window for concealment. Multiple families visible in adjacent buildings. The second target presented similar challenges, with the added complexity of innocent civilians moving about their daily routines just meters away from the enemy sniper. Any miscalculation in wind reading or range estimation could result in tragic consequences. Target 3 is on the rooftop of a compound on the eastern edge of the village. Most isolated position, but still surrounded by residential areas. Maria spent the next hour developing a detailed engagement plan for each target. The shots would have to be taken in rapid succession to prevent the surviving snipers from changing positions or taking revenge on civilian hostages. Each engagement required different ballistic calculations due to varying ranges and environmental factors. At 0847 hours, radio intelligence intercepted Taliban communications indicating that the enemy snipers were preparing to execute civilian hostages in response to American reconnaissance activities. The tactical situation had become critical, and immediate action was required to prevent a massacre. Sierra Team, you are cleared to engage all 3 targets. Morrison's voice crackled through their radio. Civilian lives are at stake. Take your shots. Maria began with Target 3, the most isolated enemy position. At 1,150 meters, the shot was well within her capabilities, and the backstop was relatively clear of civilian structures. The Barrett fired with its familiar roar, and the enemy sniper was eliminated with a single precise shot. She immediately shifted to Target 2, making rapid adjustments for the different range and wind conditions. This shot was more challenging due to the urban environment, but her bullet found its mark with surgical precision. The enemy sniper was eliminated without damage to surrounding buildings. Target 1, positioned in the mosque minaret, presented the most complex shooting problem. The range was 980 meters, the target was partially concealed, and the religious significance of the building required absolute precision to avoid creating a diplomatic incident. Maria made her final calculations and fired. The bullet struck the enemy sniper precisely, eliminating the threat while leaving the historic minaret undamaged. In less than 3 minutes, she had neutralized all 3 enemy snipers, clearing the way for ground forces to assault the village and rescue the civilian hostages. The liberation of Kamar village proceeded without significant casualties, thanks to the elimination of the sniper threat that had covered the Taliban's defensive positions. 62 civilians were rescued unharmed, and intelligence gathered during the operation led to the capture of several high-value Taliban leaders in subsequent raids. The urban precision shooting demonstrated in Kamar represented a new chapter in Maria's military career and established new standards for sniper operations in populated areas. The ability to engage multiple targets accurately and rapidly while minimizing civilian casualties became a case study that was analyzed and taught in military schools around the world. As her deployment in Afghanistan neared its end, Maria reflected on the evolution of her skills and mission requirements. She had arrived at Thunder Base as a competent long-range marksman and was leaving as a proven master of precision shooting under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The 3,347-meter record shot would be remembered as a pinnacle of marksmanship achievement, but her work in urban environments had demonstrated the breadth of capabilities that modern military snipers required. Commander Morrison, who had initially questioned the wisdom of deploying a female sniper in his area of operations, became one of her strongest advocates. In his final evaluation report, he wrote, "Staff Sergeant Santos has redefined what is possible in precision marksmanship operations. Her technical skills, tactical judgment, and performance under pressure represent the absolute pinnacle of professional excellence. Any military unit would be fortunate to have her capabilities available." The statistics of Maria's deployment told only part of the story. 47 confirmed kills, including the longest shot in military history, successful completion of 23 combat missions, and 0 civilian casualties despite operating in complex urban environments. But the true measure of her impact was found in the American soldiers who returned home safely because of her protection and the Afghan civilians who were spared Taliban brutality through her precision intervention. As she prepared to leave Thunder Base for the final time, Maria packed her Barrett M82 with the same careful attention she had given it throughout their partnership. The rifle had been her constant companion through months of danger and had enabled achievements that would influence military doctrine for generations to come. The war in Afghanistan would continue long after her departure, but Maria Santos had proven that individual excellence could make a meaningful difference even in the most complex and challenging operational environments. Her legacy would live on in the sniper schools where her techniques were taught, in the tactical manuals that incorporated her innovations, and in the lives of countless soldiers who benefited from the new standards of precision and professionalism she had established. The little girl from San Antonio who had dreamed of serving her country had become a legend whose name would be spoken with reverence wherever precision marksmanship was practiced. The 3,347-meter shot that had stunned Commander Morrison was just one moment in a career that had redefined the possible and established new boundaries for military excellence. As her helicopter lifted off from Thunder Base for the last time, Maria looked down at the Afghan mountains where she had made history. Somewhere in those rocky peaks, future generations of marksmen would study the positions where she had worked, learning from her example and pushing the boundaries of their craft even further. The echo of that record-breaking shot would continue to resonate through military history, a testament to the power of precision, dedication, and the unwavering pursuit of excellence under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Maria Santos had not just broken records. She had shown that with sufficient skill and determination, even the impossible could become routine.